My name is Claire, and this is Emma, and we're the presidents of the Research and Sustainability Network. I'm really thrilled to see that so many people came out tonight, despite this being one of the busiest weeks of the semester, probably. This launch event is the first of a speaker series dedicated to research in sustainability, and that will draw from the work of researchers across disciplines and faculties at McGill. First, I'd like to acknowledge that McGill University is located on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among indigenous peoples, and that RSN honors, recognizes, and respects these nations as the traditional stewards of the land and waters on which we meet today. And secondly, I'd like to say a few words on why we have chosen to focus on research in sustainability. So there has been a lot of focus on sustainability recently, so much so that McGill funds entire research centers dedicated to it, such as the MSSI or the Chartier Institute for Sustainability and Design. Sustainability is a concept that carries a lot of misconceptions, and that has come to reflect kind of vague sense of environmental and social awareness, but with very vague actual implications. It's often unclear what sustainability itself even means. Although it is an evolving concept, I'd like to refer to Robert Solow, who famously defined sustainability as fundamentally a matter of distributional equity. A sustainable society is one that ensures distributional equity, so in terms of access to resources, potential of growth, quality of life. So distributional equity across future generations as well as current ones, within the limits set by our natural environment. So essentially, this means lifting populations today out of poverty while allowing populations tomorrow to enjoy the same or higher quality of life, while considering the costs associated with that on our environment. Sustainability is therefore not separate from other disciplines, but is a movement, mindset, and goal that can be and should be integrated within all realms of studies. Setting such a target for society has implications for policy and governance, natural resource management, and unlocks enormous potential for technology, science, and engineering. It requires innovation on many fronts, which demonstrates the need for a lot of research.
So, today's event marks the official launch of RSN as an organization on McGill campus. And I'll admit, when Claire first approached me about starting a group dedicated to creating a club that develops the networking skills of undergraduates in an interdisciplinary environment that celebrates key McGill research, I was surprised. But not because it's a novel concept, because it surprises me that no one has taken advantage of this key niche in our school. In an information era where technology seemingly evolves by the minute, it is never too soon to start cultivating the leaders of tomorrow. As students impassioned by the field of sustainability, you will be carving out the role that Canada and our international systems play in a volatile political, economic, and social environment. As undergraduates, you will be at the helm of the next generation who will set the ideals around which we shape our markets. Open-minded, forward-thinking, innovative, these are terms already described for our generation. So, in 2017, with our mercurial international system, we will be the leaders who take the reins and direct our systems towards a more sustainable future. Thus, it is time that McGill acknowledge the significance of our undergrads and give them the tools to succeed in the field. Networking and cultivating connections has become all the more crucial to surviving in the field of sustainability. And this is all the more magnified as the field grows increasingly interdisciplinary. Indeed, as we look for solutions to mitigate climate change, it becomes more evident that we will need to integrate the expertise of each field to fully address the issue. So, it's for this reason we have founded RSN as an entirely interdisciplinary group. No matter what you study or what inspires you, you can play a vital role in redefining sustainability from the ground up. Welcome to RSN.
So first, we'd like to introduce Heather McShane, the Catalyst-in-Chief of the McGill Sustainability Systems Initiative, to say a few words about the leading research center in sustainability at McGill.
This is not my presentation. Okay, well, I guess I'll start off while this is coming on, to say thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here. When the RSN first came to talk to me, I didn't quite know what it was, but when you talk about what we're going to do, it made perfect sense, and it's a perfect student-led organization to reflect what we're doing in research with the MSSI. And I can see my slides here, so maybe I'll just talk to you about it. Okay. Okay. You could all gather around. Okay. Well, I can talk through it. So, if you could see the first slide, it would say. No, it's gone. Okay. So, why? I've got 5 minutes. I think we just use 3 of them. The reason, why did we start the McGill Sustainability Systems Initiative? Well, about a couple of years ago, McGill realized, much as you've heard in the introductory talk today, that we have a lot of workers in sustainability, like we have a lot of students who are working or are interested in sustainability, but we don't have a hub. There we go, second slide, thank you. We don't have a hub, that's the first slide. Yes. Okay, well that's it. You see my presentation, so goodbye. Okay, I need vision statement. So thank you. That's it. So we don't have anything that brings together all these people from across disciplines and across faculties to be able to work together to work in a transdisciplinary way, which is the only way we're going to actually address some of these really difficult or wicked problems in sustainability. So the principal gave some funding to the Deans of Agriculture, Engineering and Science to create this, and they made me the catalyst-in-chief and program director. So it's my job to cut across the silos and try and bring together researchers, which are not just researchers at a faculty level, although that's the main area that we're looking at right now, but also at graduate, postgraduate, and undergraduate level. That's where we want to get to eventually, to create this community and help you all go and solve the problems that we have contributed to. So the mission statement is to build a multidisciplinary community of scholars who, in collaboration with external partners and stakeholders, this is really important. We want to, most of the academics are working in the education environment. We want to reach out and to work and engage with people who are actually on the ground, policymakers, NGOs, civil society, to address some of these challenges. Okay, so what do? We have invited speakers. We have lightning talks, which are 4-minute talks where people come and describe what the sustainability research is, how they're interested. These are all available online. We hold workshops and symposia. We will do. We've been going 1 year so far. And after everything, we hold a social event, just as you're doing today, to create those cross-disciplinary community, a community of trust. Because when you're working with people from different disciplines, you have different languages, and you really need to build that trust so that you can speak together and not worry about being misinterpreted. We have 3 research themes, which is the main emphasis. One is sustaining landscapes. One is creating materials for the future, which is looking from cradle to grave, life cycle assessment, including risk analysis, to make sure that we're not making new materials that are actually just going to be worse than the ones that we're replacing, and adapting urban environments, which I think is what your 2 speakers are going to talk about today. Funding, the one that I really wanted to show you today is the Accelerated Fund. This is the high-risk, high-reward project with the potential to make significant impact. We have a student category. We're going to be launching this next semester, so in the winter semester, where we can offer up to $7,000 for one of these high-risk, high-reward, and preferably interdisciplinary projects. So we invite you to all come and make an application. We also have an innovation fund to take, if you have ideas and working with your profs in research, to take things to the next stage of sustainability, commercialization within the realm of sustainability. So a lot of you are probably, or might have wondered, what's the difference between this and what MOOS does. So that's the Office of Sustainability. So we build cross-disciplinary research communities where they're building on-campus sustainability using non-research projects, we focus on research projects. We look at we talk with scholars and students specifically engaged in sustainability research, which covers a very broad set of categories. And they will engage with anyone in the McGill community who wants to increase campus sustainability specifically. So you're greening of the campus, you're inviting Rolling to come and cater for you, things like this. Okay, and I think, is that my last slide? Oh, how can you follow? How can you get engaged? We would really like to get more students engaged in this. We have a website which has reading material and information about the website. We invite you to send things into us so that we can publish. We're starting a newsletter next month. We've got a Twitter account. We'd really like you to follow us. I'd like to get to 100 supporters. We did have a Facebook page, but because we so far have been dealing with Cross, we have no friends, so we stopped that. We have a mailing list. If you go to the website and go to the Join MSSI tab, which I think is the last one on the right, you can join our mailing list and you'll be given, you'll get information on events and other news and our newsletter and things. And you can send an email to our email address. And on the 11th of December, we have Sarah Moser from the Department of Geography is going to talk to us about new cities. And you probably haven't read that, but does anyone have any idea how many new cities are currently being planned in the world? Any idea? I was amazed. 200. That's a huge amount, and that's a huge potential for creating something sustainable or creating something that's a complete mess, creating something that's socially inclusive, and creating something that's environmentally friendly, or doing exactly the opposite. So if you come to this talk on December the 11th at the Red Path at 3 p.m., you'll learn more about it. And we've got more information about her on the website. So thank you very much. I really am very impressed, and I look forward to coming to more of your talks if I'm invited. And I wish you all the success. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heather. In our experiences as students communicating with MSSI, we found them incredibly cooperative and communicative. So we encourage anyone interested in their opportunities to reach out to them or attend the speaker series. So we have chosen to focus our first panel on sustainable urbanism because it is a subject that fully reflects the interdisciplinary nature of modern sustainability. Sustainable urbanism refers to the application of sustainability and resilience principles to urban development. Our speakers today will explore the different dimensions of a sustainable city as they relate to agriculture, policy, society, and planning. Our first speaker is Professor Vikram Bhatt from the School of Architecture. Professor Bhatt has done extensive research in the field of human settlements planning, urban design, housing, and urban agriculture. More specifically, his human settlements research deals with the issue of where and how people live interactively via the creative engagement of designers in the process. Professor Bhatt.
November evening, it's really heartwarming to see the initiative which you people have launched. And I must say, I've been here a few years, you can see it. It's the student population. I was a student here too, and it is the future generation that has always dragged this university kicking and screaming in all the directions they wanted to. And that's why it's a better place. And it's going to be a better place because of the energy that continues to flow here. Compliments. And it really shows in, next to the basket, the way they describe, it is the connectivity of all of it. I teach in the School of Architecture. I've been involved in problems of human settlement, meaning housing and shelter issues of poor people, ordinary people, in poor countries as well as in the wealthier countries. When I received this email from the group and read Sustainable Urbanism, the Future of Agriculture, Technology, and Governance, I put on my hat that of somebody who has been working with poor communities in urban areas. And I asked myself, what are these folks talking about? Are they talking about cities farming for the future? Do they want to turn cities into farms, make cities into villages? So, and what do they mean by sustainable cities? So I say, is it a reality or Arcadia? What is it that they're going to do? What is this idea all about? So I say, let's look at the guy like Simon Schama, who wrote a very beautiful, influential book. Some of you must have studied in history of art or other books of his. In Landscape and Memory, he describes the primitive of wild Arcadia, gobbled caicons and kept goats. At least, according to Herodotus and Pausanias. All that Hampstead Heath had were bilberries and rabbits, and not enough of either to support a settled population. And he is describing the Hampstead Heath, where I would argue the history of modern Western city begins, the suburbs, and the kind of cities which we have created. So if we really want to address this challenge which you people have thrown, it's a real gauntlet, I would argue that we will need new models of urbanism. We will have to create new models. We will have to think through, we will have to figure out ways if we want to do something. And we'll muddle our way through it, but it's worth a try. Why bring farming in cities? Any takers? Things are working well on my account, I would say. We are 7 billion, going to be 9. 54% global population lives in cities. We're still urbanizing, some places growing very quickly. Specialization, things grown somewhere, consumed somewhere, seems to work quite okay. We've got mountains of food. So on one hand, it's working. Now you have, so why do it?
Just reduce emissions, I guess, on transportation, bringing things into the city from far away.
Okay. We have numbers in an envelope you can count that energy saves. In England, we did calculations on that. Raising sheep in England was more expensive than bringing them from Australia.
Money-wise?
Yeah, and energy pool. The whole, not just the cost of, even with other takers.
Having plants in the city can help.
Sorry,
Having plants or a lot of green matter in cities can help reduce the urban heat effect, the urban heat island effect, and perhaps if you grew a lot of farms on like tall skyscrapers, that could help make it a more efficient manner of distributing local food to people in that area.
it's conceivable. So I listed some of those things. I would argue, and you were saying something in a very similar way, cities could be better, could sustain themselves better. Cities produce everything, wealth, knowledge, culture. Why can't they produce food? City itself is an artificial construct. It's our creation. We're talking about net zero cities. Don't have to consume, produce and consume, or produce more than consume. So certainly we can set the bar high and make city more sustainable. Fight urban poverty, as you say. That's the great challenge. Make a city which is not full of rich and poor. Can we do something? Help counter the climate change. and reduce hunger and food insecurity in cities which exist. And perhaps if it's food is closer in this cycle, I thought, and I have been working at it for a while, opportunities may exist to think of urbanism in a slightly different manner. So to expand cities, limits of the city, I've been doing very modest things. What I've been working on for many years is landscape also is an artificial construct introduced into the city, came in the Western societies in a different way, came in the Oriental societies in a different way, came in a different way in the Middle Eastern societies. Nevertheless, landscape also is an artificial construct. So why not expand boundaries of landscape in the city? Of course, I deal with the landscape and the traditional questions of beauty, respecting the nature, bringing in nature and enjoying that. Also manage and control topological, logistical, and technological, as you have proposed. What my experience tells me, if we really want to change this urbanism in the city, actually moving forward, it's essential to consider human capacity. That's the most important thing. Number two, creativity and existing conditions. Hold it. What is needed here is a recognition. This is a very important recognition that it is us who makes the city go, not the widgets. Cars are 100 years old. Electricity is 100 years old. They may not be here tomorrow. We will have a very different city. Cities are very old. So in this process, to maintain a longer perspective than what we have been kind of taught to deal with is important. And to expand the edible landscapes in the city, I say, the landscape which is addressing these issues, if it is to address this idea that you have, what do we do? Use urban residents as laborers, use urban resources like organic waste as compost and urban wastewater for irrigation, build direct ties with consumers. Think about the impact of urban ecology it will have, both positive and negative. Just growing trees is not going to cool down the city. Sure, it will, but it will also generate a lot of waste. So what we're going to deal and how we're going to deal with it is another issue. And make them part of the urban food system. Then and then there is a robust relationship, which is much more localized rather than globalized. And you will be competing for the resources. This is going to be a great challenge. The same resources which you want to use for agriculture are wanted for something else, or are part of something else. The first thing that happened, people, when they started talking about bringing urban agriculture as it became known, was to go to this study which was done from a satellite image. And that's a satellite image of the lower 48, United States, and all the green stuff you see are the lawns. Lawns be gone. That's what was the first slogan. Lawn itself is a very powerful cultural construct, not easy to torpedo it. You can try to shame Magnum PI for watering his lawn last year during, or this is, you know this guy, correct? Or no? This is an old guy. It's only us who know him. Somebody here, no? Nobody? Tell them who is he.
Popular TV show, I don't know, feeling an action guy, right?
No. He's a very famous TV series guy who used to act as a Magnum PI. He owns large estates in California and grows avocados and other stuff. And last drought, he was caught watering his lawns and other things. So that's why I just had to bring him out. I just couldn't help it. But that is not where the challenge is. You're fighting for the same resource or same acreages. So what gives is going to be a contested and really barely fought over territories. What I have learned working internationally in very poor communities is this. There are 1.3 billion farmers around the globe. 1/3 of them, more than 400 million farmers, work primarily with hand tools. No chemical fertilizers, no pesticide, very little animal power. Globally, we have 28, 30 million tractors. You see the slice. They control the agriculture. Those guys are running out of any competing capacity. They don't have even extra earnings coming in from there. What happens? They end up, go next, please. They end up in slums like this in cities around the globe. And as a person who is addressing the human settlement challenges, here we are. Now, in this densely populated area, how can we try to address the challenge that you have thrown? And with researchers and colleagues in School of Planning, in other disciplines, we have been trying to look for answers where we can grow food. So here are some of the designs that students did for this particular slum, working with the UNSCAP and others. We tried to improve the settlements also, the slums which were there. We worked with the local NGOs in there, and then with the local health department and others, and these designs which we have proposed, we tried to first, working with the community, really physically upgrade them and also integrate in very little spaces some kind of edible landscape production. Working with the agriculture department, we also tried to introduce dietary supplements. You don't have a lot of space to grow, but the dietary deficiencies which were there, how do we overcome them and what you could do which fits within the daily dietary cycles? So the solutions were perhaps replicable somewhere else, but they were not global in the sense that there was no aspirin that we were inventing. We really had to work as closely with the communities as locally. But look at the amount of food a person can get. Look at the bush beans growing in front of the little terrace. They not only feed themselves, they are able to feed their entire extended family. There was the same kind of problem in Rosario, but the Rosario is not the same as Colombo is. What we found, a lot more growing areas, they are able to grow a lot more food, tremendous poverty in the city, trying to work and connect these communities with higher income communities. So again, making designs, identifying potential areas where we could grow food in much greater quantity next. Working with the communities, showing them where we could grow, even on the streets, on the shoulders, on the sidewalks, and other areas, in other leftover spaces, go on. And this is a whole production, which is a partnership with the municipal government, where the heavy burden of getting them going, getting the fences all set up, preparing the grounds initially, and then city moves away, working with them in the other way. Been also looking at the hemiboreal city of Montreal. It's a very different city. Our needs are different. It's a multicultural city. Demands are very different. Go back. What you're looking at here are the community gardens and collective gardens in Montreal. So convincing the city that this is a very important activity which needs to be nurtured and carried further was initially just showing them and identifying them and mapping them next. It's a thriving activity. More than between 1 to 2% population of Montreal is engaged in this. People can grow food of their own choice. I have a veggie patch too myself. I grow a lot of stuff and I share it with my neighbors. Neighbors can come and harvest with me too. Next. That's the size of a typical allotment garden. And this is not a fight between cars and veggie patch. Both can coexist. That's my belief. You have to find your way, subtle ways around it. Next. We tried to do the same thing on the campus of McGill. It's 11 years and counting when we launched the Edible Campus, working in partnership Alternative, which is a greening organized an NGO locally, Santrapo Roulant, which is a food security social cohesion group, and the research group that I direct. Next. It's a partnership of campus community with an NGO community with a community that is food insecure, which uses food and brings all kinds of resources together and tries to leverage them by moving them in a right way so that you make people, those who are food insecure, through food secure, and break social barriers. So this is the whole process, and this is the process of growing food on the campus. Go on. This is Burnside Hall. That's how it is, or used to be. Next. This is how it started with 130 containers, before and after. Bush beans can grow here too, not only in Colombo's nice tropical climate. Next. We have raised beds, growing a lot of food. Next. All hands have to be on the deck. All members of communities are needed to move this forward. From the Queen's representative to Canada, he stepped down, who has come here to deliver food to our clients, to volunteers who run the social organization. The way we are working in this process, if we really want to take this forward, blue-collar workers are not going to run this affair. It's the community of us who is going to move this thing forward. Next. This is what it is. Edible Campus is Burnside Hall. This is little growing area. That is where all our clients are. That's what is the relationship. McGill is a big campus, big facility. Downtown, McDonald College, the campus is the largest open space on the island of Montreal. We can do what we want. Charity begins at home.
Thank you so much, Professor Bott. It's true, in coming decades, with the rise of megacities and as worsening air conditions make environmental incorporation into cities all the more crucial, we can expect to see significant changes, specifically in countries like Canada. So, our next presenters are from the student research class at McGill School of Environment, Jay Garad, Dan Tamnoyan, Ivana Nedyarkova, and Asha Sonja Haywood, who will be exploring the definition of green space as it relates to the McGill campus.
All right, good evening. My name is Dantam. So this is actually Kristen, because Asha could not be here today, Jacob and Ivana. So we are enrolled in the Environment 401 research class, and I'm sure some of you are also enrolled in that class, or maybe enrolled in that class in the future. So this is just one example of a project that you might expect in that class. So our project is on McGill's green spaces. So just to give you a brief overview, we have 3 objectives. So first is to define green spaces, and especially define them in the context of a university campus. And then our second objective is then to assess the green spaces on McGill's campus. So both the downtown campus and the McDonald campus. And that leads us to our third objective, which is to create a robust database of these green spaces. In the sense, we're creating like a tool for McGill's administration to be able to map, to measure and evaluate the green spaces on the campus. So for this project, we are working in collaboration with our client, Kathleen Eng, from the McGill Office of Sustainability, or MOOSE. And so MOOSE is interested in our data because it'll help track the McGill's progress in creating a more sustainable learning environment. We're also working with Mr. Ian Tassersfield from Campus and Space Planning. He's given us some preliminary data and maps. So why exactly are green spaces so important? Well, there's a lot of research that has been done that show that there are not only environmental benefits, but also health benefits. So in the context of climate change, polluted cities, well, having green spaces in cities will contribute to the reduction of urban heat island, as someone had mentioned earlier, to the protection of biodiversity, to air filtration, or even flood mitigation. And then the World Health Organization has also shown that the presence of green spaces can improve mental health and can encourage active lifestyles. Since green spaces are often designed for recreational purposes, then they can serve as, well, they can help foster a sense of community because people gather, they meet, and they connect in those places. So given all of those benefits, McGill has put a lot of efforts into greening its campuses. And so McGill and MOOSE wants to be able to map, to measure, and especially develop criteria on which to evaluate these green spaces. But to do that, if you don't have data, if you don't have a good database for that, then it becomes very difficult. So which is why our research is needed.
So in order to do all of this, we first need to be able to define what exactly a green space constitutes, which may seem like a simplistic question, but in fact, on just reviewing the literature and many environmental organizations' definitions of green space, you can see that there is a wide array with a lot of variance of definitions that exist and of criteria that can describe what a green space is. Yeah. Upon reviewing a lot of the academic literature, we took out 2 points. First, that green spaces are defined using very different methods, and second, that most definitions of green space are quite context dependent. So for methods of definition, many papers will list examples of what a green space is without any particular set of criteria. So just saying a green space is a park and a yard and a sports field, and that's it. Others will classify by vegetation type, and others still will use ecosystem services as a framework to classify green spaces by determining whether a green space is useful for something like air quality management or water filtration. As for context, a literature review that was done earlier this year of papers that talked about green space saw that the definition of a paper of a green space was entirely dependent on what exactly that paper was focusing on. So a researcher that is looking at carbon sequestration would want to define a green space based on tree cover, canopy cover, simply because trees are what holds carbon. On the other hand, a study that's looking at public health will probably want to focus its definition of green space on its accessibility, because if a space isn't accessible for a person, it can affect its health, and that's what a public health researcher would be interested in. Therefore, our context is a university campus. Many university campuses have given a definition of a green space when talking about many of the initiatives that they have taken to green their campuses. They are very varied, much like they are in the literature, but we have taken out a few common points which appear across all definitions, which mention first, vegetation, second, the connectivity of a green space, second, its purpose or use, and third, the ecosystem services that it may provide to a campus. That leads us to our research questions, essentially. The first of which is, what is a suitable definition for green space on McGill property? And second, what are the quantitative and qualitative attributes of McGill's green spaces? Now, although we are planning to revisit our definition of a green space once we have data and analyze it, we first needed a tentative definition which allowed us to, in fact, collect the data on the green spaces. As such, our definition is, for now, that a green space is a connected, permanent or semi-permanent vegetated area providing one or more ecosystem services, thus tying in the common themes that we saw across other university campuses' definitions of green space.
Perfect. So, tackling a complex sustainability challenge like this one involves many interdisciplinary methods, so I'm just going to give you a run through of those methods now. So we started with this literature review, looking at different academic studies as well as campus land use plans to come up with this tentative definition that will guide our site selection in the next section. So we started with maps of the downtown campus and the McDonald campus provided to us by Facilities Planning and the Office of Sustainability. Next slide. So we got GIS maps of the downtown campus, which was wonderful, based on a satellite land use survey. So we had polygons created for each vegetated area, which we identified as a potential green space. For the McDonald campus, we were not so lucky. We had to create those polygons ourselves, but we did have a vegetation map to base that off of. To select attributes to survey at each site, we came up with a list of 28 crucial attributes on our own from the literature review, as well as in consultation with the Office of Sustainability. They cover everything from the biophysical aspects of the green space to the social contextual aspects as well. So some highlights include the dominant vegetation, the shade, the permeability, the type of attributes that you'd expect from any ecological study, as well as more contextual attributes such as the primary ecosystem service, the accessibility of the site for the rest of campus, and the recreational features that are kind of exist on that site, including the number of seats, artwork, etc. So, next slide. The data collection, we began in early October, and we're just finishing up this week. It's very cold. So we imported the survey onto our cell phones, onto an Esri Survey 123 app, which is a really great app. We can fill out the survey on the app and then import it straight into ArcGIS for analysis later. Next slide. Done all the space on campus. One of these things is not like the other. Very serious business. Very time-consuming as well. So the analysis is going to begin soon. This is where the real fun begins for me and my technical partner, Chris. We're going to put all the data onto ArcGIS and evaluate all the different types of attributes that we've collected. So we're going to perform a sensitivity analysis to refine our definition. In short, this basically means finding out which attributes are important in the green space on campus, what we've done well, is there a diversity of different attributes among the green space on campus, and what is missing, what can we plan for in the future. This also includes statistical analyses of just the different types of ecosystem services provided by sites at McGill. Again, which services are we doing well, which services do we need to plan for more in the future. So this is just an example, since we don't have any solid results yet, unfortunately, of a sample data table that would be returned by the Survey 123 data collection, as well as, oh no, it's okay, as well as a chart of the different types of green spaces on the downtown campus. Next slide. So just the quick timeline of the project. As I said, early October, we started the site selection and the data collection. We're finishing up that this week, and then we're going to move on to analysis mid-November, and tentative results should come in the next few weeks, I hope, because that's the deadline.
So we faced a few challenges while collecting our data: seasonality, on-campus construction, and precision. So it is fall and the leaves are falling down, and we did have snow in the past few days, so that hindered our ability to detect certain things like soil erosion and litter. And also the flowers aren't in full bloom, so we might be underestimating some pollination services on campus. And construction was another problem for us. They are hard to access, as well as the fact that we don't know what the final results will be, so we didn't survey these spaces, but hopefully in the future other groups could do this. And we also wanted to be precise in collecting our data, in that different people were going out and collecting data, and we all wanted to come to the same result. So to avoid biases, we tried to make our survey as objective as possible, and to start our data collection, we all went out in the same spot and looked at the same thing and tried to get a consensus on what we were seeing. So our preliminary results show that the majority of green spaces on campus have 2 or more ecosystem services. An example of something that would only have 1 ecosystem service would be a patch of grass that has no real purpose as such as a green space, like, say, like recreational or air quality. We also noticed there's a lot of erosion on campus. There are a lot of heavily eroded sites from the sports fields, say, on lower campus, and from shortcuts, which are people cutting across the grass and trampling it instead of going the long way and walking on the path. And to help this, we could create shortcut paths to avoid people trampling the grass. We also noticed there's a lot of variation between sites, and this is probably an intentional thing, as different sites have different purposes. So out of this project, we are creating a comprehensive geospatial database of McGill green spaces, and each green space will be associated with its own attributes, such as presence of grass, presence of trees, etc. And we will get a clear picture of which ecosystem services are present on campus and which we will need to improve on in the future. And then this will also give us insight into stewardship and planning decisions, and the effect on the ecology of McGill green spaces, and how the ecosystem services provided will change. And finally, we hope to create a model for future assessment of campus green space at McGill, and hopefully at other places as well. We hope that our survey will be simple and objective enough to be replicated. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a really critical model of students taking the initiative and possibly developing the fundamental foundation of future research done here at McGill. The models that we develop now could be used far into the future, and there's no way to predict how long our developments could be used for. So our final speaker is someone who has done extensive research on urbanism and social justice. Professor Ajman is a professor in urban and environmental policy, visiting from Tufts University. Professor Ajman is the co-founder of the Black Environment Network, co-founder and now editor-in-chief of Local Environment, the International Journal of Justice and Sustainability, affiliate at the Civitas Athenaeum Laboratory, and sits on the academic advisory board of the Center for the Future of Places. He is known for his extensive work on the concept of just sustainability. Professor Ajman.
Thank you. Most important thing here is I tweet a lot. So if you find that anything I say is irrational, silly, or even really sensible, please use my Twitter handle, and I have a hashtag #JustSustainabilities as well. So there are my 3 affiliations. Tufts, I'm a visiting professor this year at McGill in the School of Urban Planning, and I'm also advising the McConnell Foundation, who are doing some really interesting work on Future Cities Canada and Cities for People. And I just want to say, the reason I use the word just sustainabilities is that if you were to go out and ask 10 people on the streets of Montreal, 10 people that had an opinion of what sustainability was, 9 or even 10 would say it's about the environment. it is about the environment, but it's about so much more. It's about social justice and equity. And I think one of the problems I find is that the equity and justice aspects of sustainability are often left implicit. I want to make them explicit, so I preface the word sustainability by using the word just. So I want to talk about this idea of just sustainability in terms of policy planning and practice, which is the area that I sort of hang out in. Next slide, please. So I think a great definition of urban planning is managing our coexistence in shared space. Two very powerful words, coexistence and shared space. And that's what urban planning is about. How do we manage the coexistence of humans in this shared space? Not only in shared space, but the coexistence of people who look, think, act, pray very differently to us. As Leonie Sandercock at UBC said, this speaks with equal clarity about environmental, transport, housing and other conflicts, reminding us that whether we like it or not, we do share space on the planet with others who in many ways are not like us. And we need to find ways of coexisting in these spaces, from the next door neighbour to the street, to the neighbourhood, to the city and to the region. And so my idea of just sustainability is intimately about how do we manage and celebrate coexistence in shared space. So I'm going to take you through three themes. I obviously can't be extensive in this, but I'm going to just take you through three themes that I think about quite a lot. Space and place, food and culture. Next slide. So, space and place. I want to just give you an idea of a concept that I work with a lot called spatial justice. These are two examples, or well, one example of how a city can be divided. And there are lots of divided cities in the world. Belfast was divided, Nicosia in Cyprus, the former apartheid cities in South Africa, Jerusalem. The British Member of Parliament, David Lammy, I think comes up with a very nice definition of this idea of spatial justice. He says, just as social justice requires that life chances are not distributed along class lines, spatial justice requires that they are not distributed geographically. And when I give this talk to people in the United States, I ask people to put their hands up. Who grew up in a settlement, I ask, where there was a railway line, and on one side of the railway line, or it's a creek, or it's a road, but on one side of the road they lived, and one side you lived. That's spatial injustice, because on one side of the tracks, the so-called other side of the tracks, life chances, life expectancies, life opportunities are very different. Our cities, especially US cities, are segregated, therefore they are spatially unjust. And it's a very useful concept for us to think about in planning, and we now have one of the most powerful tools that geography, I'm a geographer, one of the most powerful tools that geography ever gave us, which is GIS. We can map spatial inequalities and spatial injustices in terms of health, in terms of jobs, in terms of income, in terms of racial and other factors. Next slide, please. So I want to give you an example, though, about how I think about spatial justice in terms of the most commonly used public space that we have, the street. Most of us don't think about streets as public spaces. We think of green spaces and parks and the nice places we want to go, but streets are the public space we use every single day. Two streets here. On the right, near where I live, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and that crane at the bottom there is the new extension to Harvard Law School. On the right, we have a US street, Massachusetts Avenue. On the left, we have a street that is exactly the same width, called Södervägen in Gothenburg, Sweden. I'm not going to ask you, how are those streets different? They are amazingly different. On the right, your rights to access to space on a US street is governed by one thing, the size of your vehicle. The bigger your vehicle, the more rights you have to public space. On the left, the Swedes have changed it all around. They've imposed spatial justice on the street. They have democratized the street such that there's a streetcar, and there's actually one, with those of you with very good eyesight, there's another one behind it, and then there's another one here. There are frequent streetcars, and they're free. they have equal rights to space with pedestrians and cyclists. In fact, to the left of the streetcar is a fence. That's about 15% of the road space, 20% of the road space, and that's the only part that is available to private vehicles. Now, a question to you. What's it like growing up for a kid, growing up on the street on the right versus the street on the left? How are kids' brains wired, seeing what I call controlled anarchy on the right versus the order and spatial justice and democratized street on the left? Next slide. We have data. This data is from, and I'm sorry about the slide, this data is about social interactions on 3 streets. One is heavy traffic, one is moderate, and one is light traffic. You can see the street with the heavy traffic. People have less friends and acquaintances and gather less than on the lightly trafficked street. And this is common sense. The slower the vehicles, the less vehicles there are, the more people will socialise. This is behind the principle of traffic calming. On the lower chart, we have the home territory on 3 streets. And the home territory is where people kind of feel comfortable. The home territory on heavily trafficked streets is very constricted to a few houses each way, whereas on the lightly trafficked street, people have much greater perceptions of their home territory. This is particularly important in gendered studies because a lot of the sort of home territory issue is related to women as traditional carers in the home. So if you go back to the other slide, you can see then that there is a very great difference. And it's unfortunate that the slide on the left, there's virtually nobody on there. I wanted there to be hundreds of people making it look like a big social street, but that's, hey, when I took that picture, there just wasn't a lot of people there. Can you move 2 slides on? The next idea about spatial justice is about urban parks. I want to think about urban parks. I don't usually advertise other people's books because I'm an academic, I want you to buy my books. But this book, if you're interested, is called Rethinking Urban Parks, Public Space and Cultural Diversity. Not biodiversity, cultural diversity. And the authors, Setherlow, Taplin and Sheld, argue that in this century, in the 21st century, the problems that we have regarding public spaces like parks is not one of disuse. We're not disusing them, but it's of patterns of design and management that exclude some people and reduce social and cultural diversity. Now, I'm an urban planner. I'm not an urban designer, but I'm an urban planner and I understand urban design. We are designing and managing public spaces in ways that exclude people. We have bags of data on what different cultural groups like in terms of public spaces. Why aren't we designing parks then and managing parks for the multicultural and intercultural cities that we now live in? Surely that would be a good thing. Because this all bases around something called contact theory. Contact theory is really simple. The more contact we have with difference and diversity, the more tolerant and accepting and even welcoming of difference and diversity we are. Our public spaces, our streets, should be spaces of engagement, spaces where we meet with people who are different. How do we, as urban planners, as sustainability advocates, how do we do that? I'm really worried. I mean, in the US, we are coming apart as a nation. I'm not going to mention his name, but somebody is fanning the flames of division. And we as urban planners are trying to think, how do we get people to speak to each other and how do we create spaces of engagement? Next slide, please. Okay, food. Let me take a look at food. This is an interesting slide. On the right, we have George and Julia Bowling, 2 farmers in Maryland. They're tobacco farmers, and the state of Maryland is offering big grants to try and get farmers out of tobacco. On the left is the signboard to their farm. What's going on? So, George and Julia, being good American entrepreneurs, realized that there are 140,000 Africans living in DC. Mostly middle and upper middle class, professors, doctors, diplomats. They want to eat African food, but they don't want to eat food that's flown in. They want to find out what can grow locally. And so George and Julia are helping find out, and they are now making a good business selling African food grown in Maryland to the Africans. So the question I want to ask you then is, what are local foods in a multicultural or intercultural society? See, if you ask the foodies, they all tell you, oh, it's got to be, you know, what should be grown here? You know, are African foods or Filipino foods, or are all of these different foods local foods? Well, not quite. There's too much prescription in the local foods movement. And let's face it, this idea of local, buy fresh, is one of the pillars of the food movement. I'm going to argue that we need to think a little bit more culturally about who defines what local is, rather than geographically what local is. Next slide, please. Filipinos in San Diego talk about their food as being local food, the food that they cook at home or that they eat in restaurants. They tend their fruit and vegetable gardens in the backyards in San Diego. They are exhibiting what we geographers call translocalism. They are bringing their local with them to San Diego, just as the Africans in DC are doing the same. So maybe we need to rethink this concept of local, and in an intercultural society, it makes sense, if people are bringing their local with them, to call these African or Filipino foods local foods as well. The geographers and geographic definitions of local have no, I mean, I can understand why you would want a geographic definition, but maybe if we want to build a bigger sort of food movement, we need to be more reflexive about the ideas of what local is, and let people define local themselves, because local is a social construct. There is no absolute definition of what local is. Next slide, please. Here in Canada, 20% of farmers in the Greater Vancouver region are Chinese Canadians. One very interesting planning issue is these homes that the Chinese Canadian farmers are making are causing all kinds of planning issues, because they're building up to the lot lines. These are large homes. They're called monster homes in Vancouver. That's another set of issues, but one of the issues that I want to talk about here is that the Chinese Canadian farmers, due to racism and due to Chinese Canadian entrepreneurialism, are not selling their foods at farmers markets, and farmers markets, like this idea of the local, are one of the pillars of the local food movement. Local food means farmers markets or community supported agriculture. Well, the Chinese Canadians aren't using them. They're setting up their own local food networks through things like roadside stalls. And both farmers markets and these roadside stalls are local in the sense that they shorten the distance between consumer and producer. But these two networks don't impinge on each other. And Gibb and Whitman at UBC call this parallel localism, that these are parallel local networks. I actually met an African woman in Vancouver when I was giving this talk, and she said, oh, I always go to the Chinese food stalls because they sell the food I want to eat. The farmers markets don't sell the food I want to eat. Next slide, please. In the US as well, there is a network now of 50 farms for refugees. My own university, Tufts University, has a farm in Lowell, Mass called New Entry Farms. These are dedicated to helping new immigrants, refugees, get a first footing into US agriculture. No different in many ways to what happened a couple of hundred years ago when the Danes, the Dutch, the Germans farmed the Great Plains. These are the new agriculturalists. Next slide, please. Food is also about performance. It's interesting, my department at Tufts, we do a dual degree with our Friedman School of Nutrition, Science and Policy. Get the name, the Friedman School of Nutrition, Science and Policy. If you went there, you'd think food was just about physiological need. But it isn't. Food is about love. Food is about performance. And these women are from Oaxaca in Mexico. They are performing their lives in America through food. They're placemaking through food. the anthropologists call this autotopography, inscribing one's culture and identity on the landscape or cityscape. And what's really important though is this quote: "I planted this garden because it's a little space like home. I grow the same plants that I had back in my garden in Oaxaca. We can eat like we ate at home, and this makes us feel like ourselves. It allows us to keep a part of who we are after coming to the United States." Food is the umbilical cord, the umbilical link between where you're from and where you are now. And in an increasingly divided United States, with our sanctuary cities for undocumented immigrants, food, I think, is a very, I don't want to use the word fertile, but I can't think of another word, a very fertile ground for cities to support immigrants and protect their foodways. We've got to remember as well is 50 to 70% of workers in the US food chain, from the fields to restaurants, are undocumented workers. 50 to 70%. It's really important that their foodways are protected. Next slide, please. So my final thoughts are on culture. And another great book, The Intercultural City, Planning for Diversity Advantage. Too many cities think diversity is something to be managed, to be tolerated, to be experimented with, and we'll have some reports and we'll get back to you when we've really found out what we should do. But this book makes the point, at what point do cities start to see diversity as less a cost, a drag on scarce resources and mind-numbing complexity, and start to see it as a force, a resource, and an opportunity? Businesses 40 years ago got the idea. You'll find now most of the top companies are, apart from some of the tech companies unfortunately, but most of the top businesses are very diverse because A, they realise that diversity sells. It's good to have people who look like the communities they're selling to. And B, controlling for other things, diversity and diverse research and development teams come up with more creative solutions. There's absolutely masses of evidence of this. Why haven't cities seen it the same way? Most cities are slightly uncomfortable with diversity. Some make some cool statements, but most cities don't fully yet realise their diversity advantage. Next slide, please. So I want to put it to you that we live in cities of difference. That's what makes them exciting. We are in the presence of otherness. And this thinking that I do on just sustainabilities helps us recognise, understand and engage difference, diversity and cultural heterogeneity. And if we can do this in inclusive, creative and productive ways, we can do this in creative and productive ways on two conditions. One, we embrace the notion of interculturalism as different from multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is like celebrating difference. Interculturalism says, how should our institutions, our public spaces, our civic arrangements change to reflect the new Canada, US, Britain? So one, we need to embrace interculturalism, and second, we need to take seriously the need for cultural competency. My students at Tufts did a survey of all US accredited planning programs. None had cultural competency as a core curriculum class. My own department, we have a few lectures on cultural competency in one of our core curriculum classes. Wouldn't you think cultural competency would be an important tool for the next generation of urban planners who are going out working in cities of difference? Social workers, urban health professionals, all have cultural competency in their codes of practice. It's time we as urban planners did. We say some nice things in our codes of practice about social justice and equity, but I know people who are really into social justice and are really into equity, but haven't got a clue when it comes to cultural competency. Next slide, please. My friend Elijah Anderson at Yale, sociologist, came up with a concept called the Cosmopolitan Canopy. He'd done a lot of research and he found that for most of the time we wander the streets And we do our best to not look at anybody else. We've got it down to an art, how not to engage other people's eyes. And if we do, we sort of look away. But he talks about, there are spaces in cities, and he calls them cosmopolitan canopies, where we are very civil and we're chatty and talky. Anywhere that kids gather with parents, usually that's a pretty cosmopolitan canopy. Places where there's water. I notice a place in Boston where there's these water spouts. You know how kids love those? And the kids all sit there and the parents sit around and they chat to each other. These are cosmopolitan canopies. But some of the best, and his best example, is the Reading Terminal Market in Philadelphia. Markets are very good. Food is a very good gathering space. And so my final question to you, is there a role for planners and planning in creating cosmopolitan canopies? Elijah Anderson, the author of this idea, being a sociologist, is more about, oh, this is the phenomenon. As an urban planner, I'm thinking, can we create cosmopolitan canopies? Because these, at least, I mean, they're not going to solve the problems of xenophobia and racism, but they are points of contact. And if that idea of contact theory is correct, and I think it is, then these are spaces where we can talk across difference and hopefully begin to understand each other a little better. Next slide, please. Thank you. And if you want to learn a little bit more about all of this, these 3 ideas are the 3 key chapters in my book, Introducing Just Sustainability's Policy and Planning and Practice. And if anybody buys it while I'm here, I'm leaving on June 29th, I'll sign it for you. Okay? Thank you.
So, apologies for the confusion. We were going to open up a question panel, but because we want to give everyone the maximum amount of time to network and interact with our speakers, we're going to open ourselves up to a networking session now. We'd like to thank all of the speakers for attending. I encourage all of you to ask them about their experiences in research and how they've managed to develop within the field. And we also have some refreshments available. We'd like to thank Central Pot Roulant, who provided us with some delicious coffee, Rollin and Soup Cafe for their catering services, and our sponsor, Le Frigo Vert. We'd also like to thank all of our executive members for their amazing work this semester. So feel free to enjoy these and move around your chairs in order to create a more dynamic space.
I just wanted to mention that we have a Facebook page, so you guys should all follow us on Facebook. And we're gonna set up some exit survey. So as you leave, it would be great if you could fill out a short survey because we want to take your input in consideration for further events. And we'll also send them to you guys if you don't get the chance to do it.